See. Welcome back from Trinidad and Tobago. I'm Hema, Ramkissoon. Corporate social responsibility. Well, it has been a buzzword since the 1980s. An investment beyond the bottom line. Well, actually, it's linked to your bottom line. But it's really going beyond the legal requirements of your business. An investment in the people, their employees, their families. It's an investment in country into, not today, but for the future. This buzz term, corporate social responsibility, has been dominating the news headlines over the last month, and this is coming out of the NGC story. I've studied it. Maybe there are things that I missed, but there are some things that may not add up to me, may not make a lot of sense. So the expert is on set this morning to clarify some of the terms and what is corporate social responsibility and how do we really benefit it, how do we measure it. And then on the flip side, this is a state-owned entity. It's a state company, a state enterprise, and it's one of the flagship companies dealing with the resources of Trinidad and Tobago that belong to me and you. And that is where is an interesting dimension in this entire discussion. Joining us on set this morning, communications consultant Denise Deming. Ms. Deming, good morning. How are you?
Fine, thank you, Hema. Good morning.
Corporate social responsibility, a buzzword for quite a while now. It sounds very fancy.
It is, but it's a serious theory, and it's been around since the 70s. And what it has evolved to is how we're looking at our triple bottom line. How do we look at our profit, our people, and our product? So in Trinidad, you have a kind of hybrid where people are not actually doing corporate social responsibility. They're doing a version of it. There are people who even do sponsorship and charitable giving and regards that as corporate social responsibility. And that's really unfortunate. But when you're talking about corporate social responsibility, we must understand that organizations must be profitable. That's kind of the starting point. However, you should not be impacting your environment negatively. So in terms of CSR, you need to be looking at what's your impact on the environment? What about your effluents? What about your emissions? How are you managing those? What's the size of your carbon footprint? How are you managing? How are you going to minimize your carbon footprint? What are you doing? And a lot of progressive companies are looking at those areas. And then the other side of it is really the people. How are you impacting your people? And one of my pet peeves really is organizations talk about CSR, but they're not paying a living wage. You can't do that. There's something that is just wrong about you declaring millions of dollars of profit and your people do not have a living wage. So if you're not looking at your people, your profit, and your product, which is called the triple bottom line, you're not doing CSR.
Now, it's interesting that people look at CSR as a sports club sponsorship, and they look at it very on the surface, and it's not part of the legislative agenda in terms of, we don't say, well, this is where you have to go. As I know in some jurisdictions throughout the globe are looking to ensure that companies actually do something serious and invest in the future. Do you think that we should be looking to that direction now?
Legislation, for some reason, and the lawyers will kill me, it has failed us. We've legislated about everything, but we have serious problems. So it's really about implementation. What is happening globally? It's called soft laws. So you have institutions developing, advocacy institutions developing around, let's say, the energy sector, and they try to use moral suasion so that all of the companies operate according to certain standards. So I really feel that we need to be looking at soft laws as opposed to hard legislation. Hard legislation has its place, but it's not been effective.
Now, all of this, we're having this discussion coming out of a story, well, it's a series of stories relating to a state enterprise, a flagship company in the energy sector, and their CSR program. How does a company determine their CSR program? How do you say, this is and I was joking with you, they're the lovely buzzwords, strategic alignment, strategic allegiance, my vision, my mission. We know the words.
Your CSR program really comes out of your vision and mission. And if you see yourself as a long-term player in this market, you really need to be asking yourselves, how can I contribute beyond my profit, beyond the taxes that I pay to the government on my profit? How can I contribute? And you need to make a decision. Sometimes you do a lot of research, and I am one of those from corporate communications that feels, and I'm certainly committed to and believe and so on, that any corporate communication strategy must begin with research. If you do not have the research, then you're spitting in the air, or some god in the boardroom is saying, let's do this. So you need to do the research. A lot of organizations, particularly in the energy sector, historically, have looked at their fence line communities and said that, listen, we cannot be functioning and our fence line communities have big issues. And they have used that to inform their CSR program. But when you upscale your CSR program and say that we're a national company, therefore our fence line is the entire country, something is wrong with the logic.
Explain that to me, because that is the logic that they used in terms of our program touches every community. We're a flagship organization within within a sector that is the country's wealth is determined on.
Well, if you even look at NGC's website, you will see that they have an approach to CSR, and they don't articulate that they're looking at the entire country. But a strategy that says we're looking at the entire country is a strategy of disbursement that will not work. You have to have a focused strategy. In that entire country, what are the issues that your organization thinks it can make an impact on? And that I'm not seeing.
Determining the success and the effectiveness and efficacy. One thing, and I was joking with you, I didn't know whether CSR changed, so I had to flip through all of my textbooks. There was an electoral map that was used to determine the effectiveness and the reach of the programs?
That is history making. You know, and Trinidad is a very creative place, so maybe we're adding to the literature. But I too am not aware of any organization that will use an electoral map to indicate or to determine its spend and then to determine its effectiveness. Because how do you determine effectiveness? If you haven't started with research, then what is the electoral map telling you? It is simply telling you that you spent what where. If that's all you want to know, then your CSR program is not on very strong legs. That's a very weak CSR program. So using an electoral map is really an unfortunate approach. I am not aware that any other company uses an electoral map. And, you know, because I'm old, I have history, I can tell you, I worked at Texaco. There's a company that used to be called Texaco. They didn't use an electoral map. I was at Whitco. We never used an electoral map. I've taught corporate communications. I've done research. I've never, ever, ever seen an electoral map used to determine reach or impact.
How do you determine reach or impact? And if you had to assess, and I know that litigation has commenced on all sides in this, so we're looking at it from the surface. If you had to look at what is being said about the CSR program, and I know that the budget for corporate communications, Ms. Deming actually taught me corporate comment at UWI, the budget came from 6 to 200, if I remember the figures, 200 million. That's a huge increase.
Well, it is a huge increase, but we have to go back to what are the objectives. And depending on what your objectives, you can validly justify such an increase. But we don't know what the objectives were. The objectives are not transparent. We've not seen the objectives. You look historically at how NGC has spent its money. NGC would say, okay, for instance, they had a program in which they were doing basketball courts in a range of communities. And we often used to ask, you know, NGC basketball courts, what does that have? What was the alignment there? And then you had a conversation with them and you found that they looked at what can help people move. What is the health impact of that? What is the crime impact of that? What is the social mobilization of a community impact on that? So you understood that. Okay. In this case, I'm saying that what we see as the increase in spend really doesn't have very strong legs.
In terms of assessing the increase in spend, because I know with the NGC we're moving towards the CNG and all of that, so I didn't know whether or not it was all part of a corporate rebranding exercise. Did that come up at any point? When I looked at the increase, I wondered if they're doing some sort of rebranding, but I guess that hasn't come out.
That hasn't come out, because if you look at any of the details of that spend, you're not seeing those hard things like rebranding or any kind of study. You're really just seeing specifics on various communities in terms of how you give to communities. You give them an extra money for this and give them an extra money for that. So really you're not seeing, what I'm seeing there is people with a candy bag.
And just spending.
And just spending. It's a candy bag. Let's give it out. You know.
And I know in addition to that, so there are a number of recreational grounds that have been identified. How do you determine, because we use the terms alignment, strategic vision, and you know, looking at CSR, it's really beyond the law. It's your investment in a country, your investment in a people. What advice do you have for companies to say, well, this is really what you should be doing and this is what you should not be doing?
Organizations need to start, and I'm being repetitive, they need to start with the research to identify what are the needs. And after you've identified the needs, then you put some spend behind that. But what you need to be looking at is how can we have some social innovation so that there is sustainability. And that to me is the biggest issue in our country, when nobody's looking at sustainability of anything. So for instance, you improve a recreational grounds. How is that going to be sustained? Can a company be formed around this? If a company can be formed around this, can an NGO manage it? We're not looking at that. So every year, you have to keep putting money in the same place. We're not measuring what is sustainable about this and who can I reach. So our social innovation is where the thing is absolutely lacking.
Now, looking at the explanations provided, it's an investment, it's an alignment, this is what we do, this is what we have to do for Trinidad and Tobago. As an expert?
Well, as an expert, know very little about one thing. Anyway, as an expert, I'm not seeing the alignment. We've not seen the objectives. Despite all of the research we've done, we've not seen the objectives. We don't know what the alignment is. We don't even know what the strategy is. And as a result of that, it has left a vacuum or an opportunity for speculation. It's absolutely unfortunate that it has even reached a pre-action protocol letter to a former auditor. You know.
What do you think companies can learn from this? And I'm talking about state companies, because the flip side, you know, because you work private sector, and when you taught me, I think you just come out of Whitco, so you were talking a lot about their CSR initiatives and how the health impact and understanding what you do. State sector companies, they, in addition to having a board of directors and stakeholders, their stakeholders are really me and you.
Well, I have a bee in my bonnet about depoliticizing professions. We have to delink the politics from the professions. You have a change of government, you cannot have a change of the strategy just like that. We need to analyze what has been happening here. Is it something that is worthy? And allow the professionals to determine where they ought to be going, what they ought to be doing. Otherwise, we're going to continuously waste money, because long-term change is not an immediate thing, it's a long-term strategy, and you cannot just measure it today for tomorrow. You have to look at the incremental improvements, but before you do that, you have to determine where is my spend.
Now, you know, looking at where is my spend, I know there was a particular program where the justification is that we're increasing the well-being of the nation and promoting positive thought.
How do you measure that?
I'm going to ask my question to you, actually.
I don't know how you measure happiness. I mean, there's a happiness indicator and all of that. But you doing an advertising campaign around happiness doesn't measure. All that does really is fills your pocket. So
well, not mine, really the board. Let me just clarify that. I'm not based on performance.
So the happiness campaign to me was really fluff. And it really has said that NGC and several of our state enterprises, we need to have the strength to say to whoever the political directorate is that, you know, that's not the brief. That's not where we ought to go.
Could it be shifting? And I told you, because I did quote one of my lecturers to find out things have changed so much still when I did the course, that we're shifting our focus with CSR, and it's no longer investments on tangibles, but looking at well-being factors?
Well, internationally, there is a shift, and the shift is from CSR to social innovation.
Right.
So, for example, in Trinidad, we've spent a lot of money on crime fighting, on developing of communities, and re-establishing communities and so on, but we still have not had any impact. One of the reasons we've not had an impact is that it is an amorphous problem, it's a big problem, it's a dirty problem. It wouldn't be solved by one activity. And we have not said, well, okay, let us take a scientific approach to this and say, all right, if there is a high level of crime in a particular community, what are the inputs to that? What are the things that are feeding that? And what are the things that we can either stop, or we can change, or we can redesign. And that's where you'll get the social innovation, because you can't do that without the community involvement. So CSR has changed, it has changed, but it has not changed the electoral mapping.
Your closing comments, Trinidad and Tobago. Obviously, you know, we disagree on the legislative point, because I do think that maybe it's time that we start telling companies this is where you should invest, and this is to the direction of the future. But we know the implementation deficit that we have in this country and the monitoring deficit. Your closing comments.
My closing comments are that This country has a lot of professionals who have been trained, who have devoted their time to whatever their area is, and we really need to allow them to impact our society. We have to stop the politics from interfering with the development. I know that politics is an overarching activity that could foster the development, but I think within a lot of recent times, we've been seeing politics interfering with development. I think we need to allow our people to give us back what we've invested in our people.
Ms. Deming is an election year. Really, you think that's going to happen?
Yes, and listen, you see, elections, that's a methodology we've used, eh? And there's lots of flaws in it. But somebody has to stop and say, what is in this for the Trinidadian? What is in this for 20 years from now? Because lots of us are going to be living here 20 years from now. We cannot continue wasting the money that we're wasting on make good, feel-good programs without having structural change, things that make a real impact.
Understanding the impact, and it really does start on the premise of research and not only understanding what is needed, but the impact of what you're doing and monitoring it. And if it's not achieving the required returns, then stop it before it becomes something that you can't control. And that's something that we have to learn. And it is an election year, and I really do implore Trinidad and Tobago to read, understand what's going on in your country, look at the policy positions adopted by successive persons, whether it is the person wanting your vote or the person wanting to retain your vote. I'm Hema Ramkissoon. This is The Morning Brew. We take a very short break. When we come back, we'll have more for you. Stay with us.